Listen up, are you in the market for a new SUV? Well, let me introduce you to the brand new 2025 Acura ADX. And Acura's put in a lot of effort into this thing, loading it up with a bunch of standard technology, luxury features, all while maintaining a competitive price point. So let's dive into this new ADX and let me show you what it's all about.
Let's kick things off with styling. So the ADX has an all-new sporty and youthful design. Acura is giving buyers the option of 6 different colors to choose from, with this example being painted in urban gray pearl. At first glance, the ADX's design is striking and aggressive. Starting from the hood lines and leading through the rest of the body, the ADX has a broad-shouldered stance. The signature Acura Diamond Pentagon grille highlights the front of the ADX and flows nicely into the cool-looking chicane LED running lights and headlights. There's also some slight fender action from the side profile, which are painted in black and give a nice contrast to the body-colored paint. The ADX comes standard with 18-inch wheels, but this A Spec Advance trim is upgraded with 19s painted in black, wrapped in a 235/45 all-season tire. The back end wraps it up with this rad looking spoiler, LED taillights, and a dual exit exhaust.
Now let's cover trims and pricing, and Acura is making it really simple here. There are 3 trim levels to choose from. All of them come standard with front wheel drive, but can be optioned with all wheel drive for an extra $2,000. The base trim is called the ADX. It has a starting price of $36,350 and is nicely equipped as standard with a moonroof, dual zone climate controls, heated front seats, 2 screens, and a nice suite of safety features. Next up is the ADX, which starts at $39,350 and adds a list of features, but most notably a sportier interior, exterior, panoramic moonroof, a 4-way power front passenger seat, and ventilated front seats. And finally, the top of the line A Spec with advanced trim package, which is what I have here today, coming in at $43,350, which adds an even better stereo system, front and rear parking sensors, and a 360-degree camera, to name a few things. Now, one might be thinking $43,000+ for a compact SUV might be a little much, but think about this. The competitors for the ADX, such as the BMW X1, the Lexus NX, and the Audi Q3, all have a starting base price for basically around the same thing as what it'll cost you to get a top-of-the-line trim A-Spec Advance ADX, making this ADX a pretty good value in comparison.
Now the mechanical details. The ADX is equipped with a 1.5-liter turbocharged VTEC 4-cylinder engine that makes 190 horsepower and 179 pounds-feet of torque. The power is routed through a sport-tuned CVT transmission, putting power down to either the front wheels or, as mentioned, all-wheel drive as optional. And about that all-wheel drive system, it seems to be front-wheel drive biased, but can send up to 50% of the power to the rear wheels if it sees fit. Fuel economy for the front-wheel drive comes in at 2631 combined 28 and 2530 combined 27 for the all-wheel drive. Switching to the suspension and brakes, the ADX is riding on sport-tuned fixed shocks that Acura says they've tried to balance engaging driving dynamics along with a comfortable ride. Brakes measure 12.3 inches up front and 12.2 inches in the rear.
Now, as I move into the interior next, you'll notice that the steering wheel has paddle shifters, and one might be asking themselves, why? Since this is a CVT, it doesn't have any gears. Well, that's because Acura is simulating the action of upshifts and downshifts using different gear ratios, all in efforts of making this feel like an automatic transmission to increase driver engagement. Now let's move into the interior, where you'll notice the sporty and youthful design continues. As soon as you jump in, you're greeted with a leather, flat-bottom, heated steering wheel with paddle shifters. The rest of the interior is covered in a mix of leather and suede materials, giving the ADX a premium feel. Now, if this interior color wasn't to your taste, there are 2 more to choose from: red with black and black with red stitching. Now, this one I have is called Orchid, but it's essentially a mix of white leather and blue suede material, and it's a real eye-opener and pops. Now, the overall build quality and materials feel solid, and the interior feels nicely put together. Speaking of nice, I'm glad to see that the standard dual zone climate control system is controlled via tactile knobs and buttons, making it simple and easy to operate. Now in terms of comfort, I'm sitting in a seat that is 12-way adjustable, heated and ventilated. It is extremely comfortable to sit in. Sitting at 5'11", I have plenty of headroom and also a lot of legroom. Now I'll cover the back seats here in just a second, but I want to go over some miscellaneous features in this ADX. Starting with charging, now there's a wireless charger plus 4 USB Type-C ports scattered around the ADX. There's 2 up front and 2 in the back. Storage room is also very good. There's a nice sized tray in the center for your phone. The center console looks deep enough for an iPad, and the door pockets have enough space for big bottles of water. There's an absolutely banging 15-speaker 3D Bang & Olufsen premium audio system. Now let's move to technology and start covering the 2 nicely sized screens the ADX comes equipped with as standard. First is a 10.2-inch all-digital instrument cluster that displays a variety of information and is customizable. It's a nice unit with clean fonts, and it's even got red needles in this A Spec trim. Moving to the center screen, it's a 9-inch high-definition touchscreen running Acura's infotainment software. There's so much to like about this infotainment system because it's simple, intuitive, and easy to use. You can use the touchscreen. It also has physical controls. The infotainment system is simple and nicely laid out with 6 user-defined shortcuts running across the bottom of the screen, and it's very snappy. There's also a wide range of compatibilities such as Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, Amazon's Alexa, even Google features such as Assistant and Google Maps, which is accompanied with a complimentary 3-year unlimited data plan. All right, now getting into the back seat of the ADX, let's talk about the overall size. So sitting at 5'11", you can see I have plenty of legroom. I am sitting behind myself. This does have more legroom than the BMW X1. In terms of headroom, my hair is not touching the ceiling, and there's a very clever indentation that Acura has done here for a little bit more room on top of your head. The seating position, the overall comfort is good. My armrest here is cushioned. The seats are nicely cushioned, just like the ones up front. In terms of space or width, 3 adults can probably fit in here, maybe a little bit of a squeeze, but the floor is nice and flat with a small indent here, but 3 children are going to be just fine. Speaking of children, if you do have child seats, there are 2 child anchors here for those interested in an ADX that have a family. Now, in terms of features, it's not really overloaded back here. There's some nice things like a separate climate control vent for each one of the passengers. There is no third climate control zone. Everything is done up front. And the other nice thing is you see the other 2 USB Type-C chargers that I was mentioning earlier. And on top of that, these are very high capacity. They can charge up to 60 watts of power, which means that you can charge a laptop in the back seat so long as you have a wire that's compatible and all these other wonderful things that factor into charging. So back seats, good amount of space, decent amount of amenities and features, good comfort. Now let's check out the trunk before we take it out for a drive. Right now, the cargo space for the ADX, so there are multiple ways of opening this tailgate. There's a button on the key, there's a kicking motion you can use underneath the bumper here, and then there's also comfort access underneath the Acura logo. Once you open the trunk, you are greeted with 24.4 cubic feet of cargo space. Now, if you wanted more room, the rear seats back there do fold 60/40, expanding the cargo space to 55.1 cubic feet. And Acura says if you remove the front wheels, you can fit 2 mountain bikes back here. And the nice thing about it is that this floor right here is actually quite low, so loading things up into the ADX is easy. But overall, I don't see any issues of loading up the trunk with your daily groceries, daily activity, day-to-day things, going on a long weekend getaway, or even storing larger things like mountain bikes. Now, one thing I did want to show you for this cargo space or this cargo area are these buttons here. So this one will close the trunk automatically, and this one is actually a walkaway feature. This is really neat. So you push this button, and so long as you have the key and the doors are closed, check out what happens. So you push that button, you start walking away, and the trunk will close on its own. Pretty cool feature, good thinking by Acura. All right, now behind the wheel of the ADX, let's go ahead and turn this thing on and take it for a spin. foot on the brake. Start stop is up here on the dash to the right of the steering wheel. Some of the sounds at startup. All right, so as a reminder, 190 horsepower, 179 pounds-feet of torque. There are 5 different drive modes. There is snow, comfort, normal, sport, and individual. Individual allows you to tune things according to different modes, such as the engine, the steer, or different dynamics. The engine, the steering, the engine sound, the idle, start, stop, and the gauges can all be tuned independently in individual mode. I personally like the engine in sport, steering in comfort, and I'll explain later on the engine sound in sport, idle, enabled, and the gauges, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So now let's go ahead and put this thing in sport for the transmission. So there's regular D and then there's sport. And then I'll tell you what's happening with each one of those modes here in a second. But let's go ahead and get going here. And it downshifted in sport mode. Now, this does have the additional layer of being able to downshift. So going. Pretty good. The CVT responsiveness is good when I pull on the paddle shifter. Let's go again. It's quick, and it pulls nicely to redline. I would say the VTEC sensation starts coming in around the 4,000 to 4,500 range, and you get that initial urgency as well, or the additional urgency. And 0 to 60 time, there's nothing official, but my immediate sense of it, I would say it's maybe in the 6s, 6 to 6.5, sub 6. But again, I don't know anything official. So it's adequate in terms of speed. And I drove it here quite a bit prior to hitting record. And I would say it's adequate in all driving situations. Stop and go, merging onto the highway, passing people. So I think it has a decent amount of power. Now, speaking of the sporty element of this, and I'm going to tie that into the CVT. Now, some people may be discouraged by the fact that this is a CVT, and I'm not going to really touch on that, but I'm going to say that this CVT is pretty good for what it is, okay? And let me explain. There's a couple things I do like about it. So let me go ahead and put it back in normal so it calms down for a second. And so the CVT, actually, I'm going to put it in sport. And the nice thing about it, whether you're in sport or D, okay, it allows you to use the paddle shifter. So upshift, there's 7 gears that'll allow you to play with, gears, quote unquote, but it's just changing the gear ratios, right? So downshift, 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 third gear, second gear, and mash it. So it gives you that layer of engagement that you're expecting with a paddle shifter. And the other nice thing is, when you're in sport like I am now, it will hold the gears. So for example, I'm in fourth, I can downshift all the way into second, and it won't upshift. It'll hold the gear like a regular automatic transmission or a double clutch, and allows me all the way to red line and pretty much near red line or at red line, and it will either upshift for you, or you can pull on the paddle and it'll shift by itself. Now, it will not allow you to bang up against the rev limiter, and but still, regardless, it gives you that sense of engagement. Now, don't get me wrong here. Is it as good as an automatic or a ZF automatic, let's say, or a double clutch? No. Is it as crisp? No. Is it as engaging? No. Would it have been better, this car, with one of those transmissions? Probably. But I think this CVT does a decent job in working with what it's got. Taking its inherent disadvantages, this is never going to feel like an automatic or a double clutch, taking those disadvantages, minimizing them as much as possible while still taking advantage of some of the benefits that a CVT offers. So I think It adds that layer of engagement that you're expecting from your transmission in a sporty experience. Maybe the layer isn't as thick as you would get in a ZF or in a double clutch, but the layer is definitely still there. Now, I'm going to switch over into the suspension, braking, and the steering feedback. Okay, so earlier on I said I like steering and comfort, and the reason for that is when I put the dynamic mode all the way in sport, the steering feedback gets a little too heavy for my taste for this type of car. I like comfort the most because it feels natural and it still loads up nicely when you're turning and driving sporty. Now, in terms of driving sporty and the suspension and the braking and the steering as well, so Acura gave us a little bit of a twisty road to drive on, and taking it in that area, I think it performs adequately for what this thing is, a 4-door, 4,000+ pound compact SUV. I think it can dance and hold its own well in a sporty environment. It's nicely balanced, especially when you're braking. Even when you stomp on the brakes, the body does a good job of balancing all the motion. It doesn't feel abrupt, and it stays, and it doesn't get upset. I'll put it to you that way. So in a sporty setting, it holds its own, it could dance, and it's actually quite surprising that car manufacturers are able to do this with this type of weight and this type of configuration. But I will say that in terms of sportiness versus daily drivability and comfort, I think this is tuned more for daily drivability and comfort versus all-out sport, or just sport in general. I would say in terms of percentage, 60-40, or maybe even 65-35 in terms of sportiness versus daily drivability and comfort. But I think it holds its own nicely in the sporty element, and from a daily drivability comfort setting, I think it performs really nicely. And I'm going to use this to transition into daily drivability, comfort, and some of those things that you're really going to use this, or you're going to use, that's the use case you're going to use this in most of the time, okay? So coattailing off of what I just said, daily drivability and comfort is fantastic in this car, okay? When you put it in that comfort mode, everything gets nice and easy to use. The steering wheel is a one-finger motion. It does still stay firm, but it's easy to use. The suspension is tuned beautifully, okay? There's a coastline that gets a little bumpy, but this thing performed fantastic. It soaks up the bumps really nicely. There was even a point where I hadn't seen like a big indent in the road or a bump in the road, and it really kind of took it nicely and made sure that the body remained balanced and I didn't really get jolted. So daily drivability is fantastic, paired with the seat comfort is very, very good. Some of the other stuff, ergonomically, the infotainment system is within arm's reach here, so I like it how I don't have to take my eyes off of the road too much to mess around with it. Android Auto, Apple CarPlay compatibility, all that stuff. The steering wheel buttons are easy to use and easy to remember. So the volume knob, the change track, and all that stuff. And then the heated seats work nice. The ventilated seats also work nice. One of the things that you never realize you needed until you have it is a heated steering wheel. This car does have it. And at the initial grab points of 9 and 3, it gets nice and toasty for folks who are planning on owning this car in colder weather conditions. So it's a nice feature to have. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge onto the highway, and I want to demonstrate the active cruise control and lane keep assist because I think it works nicely. But before doing that, some of the visibility, or while we're sitting here, some of the visibility dynamics, it's fantastic. It's very open and airy in this interior. The pillars are nice and thin, so I can see here between the A pillars very clearly. The B pillar here over the shoulder is fantastic as well. Just the overall sensation of driving in this is good. The seating position is good. I do have plenty of headroom. So visibility is also fantastic. The 360-degree camera works really nicely as well. Good angles. It helps you a lot when you're parking and in narrow spaces. So let's go ahead and merge onto the highway now, and let's demonstrate some of the speed capabilities here. Okay, so we're already at 60 before we even get onto the highway. So decent amount of power. And let's go ahead and merge into the second lane and engage the active cruise control. So I set it. Come on. Oh, sorry, I'm using the wrong one. Okay, here we go. So set it to 70, and then there's a separate button for lane keep, and it's doing its thing. So it does a good job of staying in the lane, maintaining its speed, slowing down. A couple of things, it's prompting me to keep my hand on the steering wheel, so it's not all out self-driving. You do have to let it know that you're still awake and alert and paying attention. So every maybe about 15 to 30 seconds, I don't know if there's an interval, it cues you to put your hand on the steering wheel, but it does a good job. Another thing it will not do is change lanes. So if I turn my indicator on to turn right, the lane keep assist will turn itself off, and I will have to nudge the steering wheel. And then when I get back in the lane, it re-engages the lane keep assist. Now, another nice thing about it is if you don't want the active cruise control to be engaged, you don't have to. So you can turn that off while still maintaining the lane keep assist. So you can just throttle and brake, and it will keep itself in the lane. So it's always a nice option to have that. So from an overall driving dynamic standpoint, I think this strikes a fantastic driving dynamic for daily drivability, for the target audience of this car, for folks who are just going to buy it and drive it on a daily basis. It provides an additional layer of sportiness with some of the VTEC and the paddle shifter engagement. And it's quiet, the visibility is good, the ergonomics are good, the comfort is fantastic. It's probably one of the highlights of this car from a driving dynamics is it's very comfortable to drive, and the seating position is good, really nicely suited for daily drivability. So as I exit the highway here, now let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. So that's the brand new 2025 Acura ADX. So Acura focused on youthful styling, a feature-rich interior, and an engaging driving experience. Did they achieve all of those things? I think mostly yes, they did. Now, the styling is fantastic, and I really like the way the ADX looks. Beyond the quality that you're expecting from an Acura product, there's absolutely no denying that the interior of the ADX is feature-rich, even in its base form. And the driving engagement, I think it's mostly a yes. Now, I'm a little surprised that the horsepower and torque number came in a little bit less than the Integra and actually lowest amongst the competition, but I guess it can't all be perfect. Overall, I do think that the ADX presents a wonderful product at a very competitive and appealing price point. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please make sure you leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram @DriveSteady. Thank you to Acura for inviting me to this ADX Media Drive event. If you're interested in some of my other reviews, here's some links for you to watch. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.